I made 11 mistakes.
Trust me, Jose, I know the feeling. Welcome back to FPL Heritage. Game week 1 is done, 67 points on the bench boost, and around 650k rank overall. So actually, Jose, maybe it wasn't that bad. So like I mentioned already, Game week 1 is officially done. And thankfully, my FPL team performed slightly better than Tottenham did. We finished on 67 points with the bench boost, which leaves us sitting around the 650k rank overall. Would I have liked a little bit more from the bench boost? Absolutely. But is the 67 points and 650k rank after Game week 1 a bad start? Not at all. And actually, getting the bench boost out of the way already gives us something I really like going forward: freedom. We don't have to worry about maintaining the perfect 15-man squad anymore. We don't have to keep money tied up on the bench just because we're planning a chip. From here, we can start attacking fixtures, moving money around the squad, and going after the players we actually want. But before we start thinking about Game week 2, let's see where those 67 points actually came from. The game week, much like everyone, started brilliantly with Arsenal. 3-0 against Coventry, a convincing performance, and immediately the investment in that Arsenal defence paid off. Raya gets the clean sheet, Calafiori gets the clean sheet and an assist, and that's exactly why I wanted Arsenal defensive coverage going into the season. We spent so much of pre-season wondering exactly what that Arsenal backline would look like, but the conclusion I kept coming back to was that I simply wanted a piece of it. And after game week 1, I'm certainly not changing my mind. Then we've got Zelis. Now this was probably one of my more aggressive picks in the final draft. We saw what he was doing during pre-season, we saw the Community Shield performance, and I decided that for the opening few game weeks, I was willing to take the punt. And we immediately got an assist. Even Zelis himself during his conference was talking about how he got an assist in FPL. I'm really pleased with that. It's only one game week obviously, but it's an encouraging start because it's not like the interest suddenly appeared because he returned. We like the positions, we like the pre-season form, we like the role, and now we've got the first FPL return to go with it. So I'm very happy keeping Zelis for now. However, there is one Arsenal player we need to talk about, Ben White. And this one hurts, because if you watch the final draft video, you'll know I had White. And then I changed him right before the deadline. I just wanted someone more substantial in minutes, which is why I got David Raya. Of course, what does Ben White then go and do? Assists, bonus points. My wife had Ben White, which made it even worse. Thank you very much, Ben. That's FPL, isn't it? You can spend weeks analysing something, have the player sitting there in your team, make one tiny last-minute change, and approximately 2 hours later, you're questioning every decision you've ever made. But I'm not going to overreact to it. The important thing is that our read on Arsenal defence was right. And somebody else that we need to mention from that Arsenal performance is Martin Odegaard. 11 points, and I thought he looked fantastic. At his price of 6.5 million, I think he's going to become a really interesting option if that level of involvement continues. He's definitely somebody going straight onto the watch list. Outside of Arsenal, there weren't actually that many big returns throughout my squad, but we did get a couple of very useful clean sheets. Verbruggen, clean sheet. Joe Rodon or Joe Salah, clean sheet. Nothing glamorous, but particularly when you've activated the bench boost, those are exactly the sort of returns you need from the cheaper players in your squad. And then, Szoboszlai. If you've been watching FPL Heritage throughout the season, you already know how much I've talked about this guy. And finally, I can sit here and say, we at least got one right. He scores, he takes the penalty, and he gets a bonus point. But forget the goal for a second. The thing that interested me most was the fact that he had the penalty. Because if Szoboszlai generally has penalties as part of his route to points this season, that changes the FPL landscape and the conversation around him considerably. We've already seen the attacking positions, we've seen how important he can be in this Liverpool system. Add penalties into that equation, very, very interesting. But let's not forget the circumstances. Alexander Isak, we thought was going to be the number 1 penalty taker, away to Newcastle, that hostile environment. Let's wait and see with this one. Unfortunately, the premium boys didn't exactly join the party. The two main captaincy options for me were Haaland and Bruno Fernandes, and both blanked. So at least there wasn't one of those horrible situations where you captain Bruno for 2 points and then watch Haaland score a hat-trick. Neither returned, we move on. Although, there is one decision that I'm considerably more annoyed about. Iliman Ndiaye. If you watched the final draft video, he was in my team. I talked about him throughout pre-season, we liked the penalty potential, we liked his involvement in Everton's attack, and then, right before the deadline, similar to Ben White, I took him out. And of course, he returns. It's frustrating because sometimes the worst FPL decisions aren't the ones you never considered. They're the ones where you already had the player. But I'm not going to spend game week 2 trying to recover points that have already disappeared. That's FPL. Sometimes the last minute change works, sometimes you immediately regret touching the team. It is what it is. And we'll probably do it another 20 times this season. One player I definitely don't regret owning though, João Pedro. First minute, goal, bang. And then an assist as Chelsea eventually went on to win 3-2 against Fulham. That's exactly the sort of start we wanted from him. And actually, that Chelsea attack has given me quite a lot to think about. Because two players I'm already watching very closely are Cole Palmer and Morgan Rogers, that Chelsea trio dubbed JP Morgan. Chelsea look really dangerous going forward, and I don't necessarily think I need to rush into either of them immediately. But I'm already looking ahead at the fixtures, and Game Week 4 at home to Hull is jumping off the page. That could be a really nice entry point into Chelsea. By then we'll have 3 game weeks of information, we'll understand the system better, we'll have a much idea of minutes and roles, and if Morgan Rogers and Cole Palmer are looking like the players we think they can be, that's a fixture I want to attack. So Chelsea are firmly on the radar. So where does that leave us? 67 points, bench boost played, around 650k overall after Game Week 1, and honestly, I'll take it. Was I hoping for a bigger bench boost? Of course. When you activate a chip in Game Week 1, there's always that little part of you imagining everything going perfectly and starting the season with some ridiculous scores like the ones we've seen on X. That didn't happen, but this wasn't a disaster either. We've got returns from Arsenal, the Zalise punt has started positively, Szoboszlai has already warded the faith, João Pedro returned. Some of the cheaper players brought home clean sheets, and most importantly, the bench boost is done. From Game Week 2 onwards, we have this flexibility now. We can start being aggressive, and after what's happened elsewhere in Game Week 1, I think we're going to need it, because there are 2 performances in particular that we need to talk about. Manchester United and Tottenham Hotspur. I'm not sure which one was worse. Let's start with United. I did not expect to be saying 2-0 defeat to Hull after Game Week 1. And credit to Hull, because they played really well. United, though, poor. And obviously that's going to create immediate questions around the FPL assets we were so interested in throughout pre-season. But here's where I'm going to urge a little bit of patience, because look what's next. Ipswich at home. Are we really going to spend all pre-season talking about these United players, watch one bad performance, and then sell them immediately before Ipswich? I'm not. Give me that fixture. If United come out and look awful again, then we've got 2 competitive matches worth of information, and perhaps we're reassessed. But I'm not ripping up everything because of one result. And for anyone bench boosting in Game Week 2, Hull themselves have suddenly become interesting opposition. If they can go away and cause Coventry anything like the problems they caused United, perhaps that fixture isn't quite the banker people assumed it was. And then there's Tottenham. Brentford 3, Tottenham 0. The less said about this, the better. However, it was nice to see one of my boys, Sangaré, absolutely tear us apart. However, there is something actually happening here from an FPL perspective. The additions of Savinho and potentially Marmoush at Spurs could change this attack quite significantly. And Marmoush at his entry point, in particular, interests me. It's a really interesting price. I'm absolutely not buying him immediately. I want to see where he plays and if he actually signs for Spurs. I want to see whether or not he starts regularly, understand his minutes, and if he establishes himself as a first-choice attacker in this Spurs side, he's going to be on my radar very quickly. Savinho gives Spurs something different as well, and suddenly there are potentially interesting options around this attack. So despite this absolutely horrific opening performance, I'm not completely writing Spurs off yet. But that's just me, and maybe I'm just being biased. Okay, we've talked about the disasters. Now let's talk about some players who came out of Game Week 1 looking very interesting indeed. And I'm going to start with a player that anyone who's been watching FPL Heritage throughout pre-season will already know about. Mamadou Sangaré. I absolutely banged the drum for this guy. We talked about him in the pre-season videos, we talked about the DEFCON potential, we talked about him being exactly the sort of player who could quietly become a fantastic FPL asset. In fact, the only reason I didn't start the season with him was because he was playing against my own team, Spurs, which in hindsight was just a terrible reason not to own somebody. Because what does he do? 14 points. 2 assists, 3 bonus points, and the defensive contribution return as well. What an introduction to FPL. And that's what makes this different from simply chasing somebody who randomly hauled in Game Week 1. We liked Sangaré before he got the 14 points. Game Week 1 hasn't created the interest. It's reinforced what we already thought. I'm probably not buying him this week, and I'll explain why shortly, but I can tell you something already. When I eventually wildcard, Sangaré is going to be very, very difficult for me to leave out. FPL Heritage pick already. Then we need to talk about Brighton, because if you started the season with the Cuyper or Hinshelwood, congratulations, you've absolutely smashed it. The Cuyper was deployed out of position on the left wing and produced a monster performance. 4 shots, 3 chances created, and a huge amount of involvement in the final third. And importantly, we also saw him taking corners, so there may be more than one route to FPL points here. And then Hinshelwood goes and scores twice. Huge rewards for managers who took either of those punts. But this is where I'm going to be boring. I'm not buying either this week because Brighton have Chelsea away next. And with the Cuyper in particular, I want more information. The left wing is incredibly exciting whilst it's there. A defender in FPL playing that far forward, immediately it gets our attention. But is it permanent? Or does he eventually drop back when Brighton have more of their players available? That's what I want to know before spending a transfer. So if you own them, brilliant, enjoy the points. If you don't own them, don't panic. One game week doesn't mean we need to buy everybody who's hauled. One player I might find harder to ignore if the minutes arrive is Cherki. Manchester City was struggling against Bournemouth. Cherki comes off the bench, 2 assists, completely changes the game. And this is where I'm really interested. If Cherki can establish himself as the number 10 in this Manchester City team, that's potentially a fantastic FPL role. We know how technically gifted he is, we know he can create, we know he's capable of producing returns. What we don't know yet is whether he's going to start every week. And that's the difference between Cherki being an interesting player and Cherki being an FPL pick. If Maresca starts him in game week 2 and we're seeing operating centrally again, then I'm listening, because that could become a really exciting differential. So, Sangaré hold, Cuyper and Hinshelwood got massive points, Cherki came on and got 2 assists. Surely I'm making a transfer this week. Nah. As things stand, my game week 2 transfer plan is incredibly simple. I'm rolling. No transfer. And honestly, that's probably my biggest piece of advice coming out of game week 1. You don't have to do anything. We spent an entire preseason building these teams. Don't let 90 minutes of football convince you that everything you believed in 2 days ago was suddenly wrong. Because the reward for holding this week isn't just keeping a transfer. It gives us 2 free transfers going into the following game week. And suddenly the possibilities become completely different. With 1 transfer, you're often looking at player A going to player B. With 2, you can restructure. You can downgrade 1 player to fund another. You can react to injuries. You can attack a fixture swing. You can move money between positions. You've got options. And after only 1 game week, I think information is worth more to me than chasing last week's points. Give me another week of Sangaré. Give me another week to understand Cuyper's position. Show me whether Hinshelwood keeps getting into those areas. Show me whether Cherki starts. Please show me that United bounce back. And show me what Savinho and Marmoush can do for Spurs. Then we enter game week 3 with 2 transfers and twice as much information. That's a much stronger position. Obviously, if you got an injury or somebody unexpectedly loses their place, that's different. But if your team is fit, don't make a transfer just because game week 1 happened. My current plan, roll, and then attack with 2 free transfers next week. And that's where I'm going to leave it for the first game week of the season. 67 points, as I already mentioned, around 650k overall. The bench boost is officially out the way. Was it the monster score I was dreaming about? No. But it's a solid enough start. We've learned a huge amount from the opening weekend. And most importantly, we're in a really flexible position going forward. For now, I'm holding, I'm rolling the transfer, and I'm giving myself another full game week of information before we start making any big decisions. Sangaré looked fantastic. Brighton have given us a couple of really interesting options. Cherki could become a really serious FPL pick. Chelsea are already on my radar for that game week 4 fixture swing. JP Morgan definitely on my hot list. And apparently, we're going to have to watch Spurs again next week. But now I want to hear from you. How did your game week 1 go? What score did you get? Did you bench boost? And most importantly, are you making a transfer for game week 2 or are you rolling like me? Drop your scores and your transfer plans in the comments below because I'll be down there replying to as many of you as I can. And if you enjoyed the video, make sure you like the video and subscribe to FPL Heritage if you haven't already. We're going to be here throughout the entire season, reviewing every game week, looking at the players catching our eye, and hopefully making slightly fewer last-minute decisions that immediately cost us points. I'm still thinking about Ndiaye. Thank you so much for watching. Good luck in game week 2, and I'll see you in the next one.